overall. And then in your meeting with your project officer, that's when you will go ahead and talk about your individual project. Let's get into it. Please do stop me if you have any questions. So the purpose of our time together is to look at our GPRA results. And this is, of course, from the APR that you submitted in May. And then we're going to talk about the program measures 1, 2, 3, and 4. Talk about the results this year and where things seem to be good as an aggregate, as a group, and areas that we can improve upon, and how we might improve together. And then I will make sure to talk about deadlines and guidance available to you. And then we'll talk about, what other topics do we want to include in Fidelity Fridays? It's been a few months. And if you recall from last year, we hit our Fidelity target as a group last year. And so we kind of took our foot off the pedal a little bit, but it looks like we might need some more work as a group on Fidelity again. And so then we can figure out what those specific topics related to Fidelity might be. So as a result of our time together, I'm hoping you'll be able to talk about the different program measures and what's required, and also know where to get help on the website, and certainly from your project officer, from me. And so as a result of that, I'm hoping you'll have a good understanding of expectations and resources to help you meet those expectations. So why are these GPRA measures important? Because they are directly related to what the SPDIG is supposed to do. This is the SPDIG theory of action. Very much simplified, but hopefully still meaningful, is that you all as projects and as evaluators helping your projects, you develop really strong professional learning or professional development. You work with your sites. You increase the use of evidence-based practices through that intervention implementation. And then as a result, children with disabilities, they flourish, they have improved outcomes. So I think if you're thinking about our program measures, good professional development is shown through program measure 1. Increasing intervention implementation is program measure 2 and 3. So program measure 2 is about improving implementation. Program measure 3 is how you're providing supports to do that, and specifically the money that goes toward that. And then program measure 4 is the improving child outcomes measure. All right. So this is our APR calendar. New grantees have one change in this, and I'll talk about that in a second. So in January, I would even say the beginning of February has been the more recent trend, is when you receive the APR directions. It could toggle back and forth, but around January, late January, early February, you receive through G5, the project director receives the continuation package. So that's your annual performance report directions by email. And then from there, we have an APR how-to webinar. We get real specific on how to do APRs. And I'll provide a summary of what we talk about today, again, just to refresh people's memory. And then before April 15th or on April 15th, you provide a draft of your program measures to your project officer. And then in May, usually early May, the APRs are due on G5. May 3rd is when it was due last year. I don't know the exact date this year. So why do we ask for a draft of your program measures? That is because we found there were times when we didn't have some of the details we needed for our contractor to make decisions about whether you were meeting your targets, et cetera. So your project officer gives it a look-see and then lets you know if any information needs to be changed. Please do stop me if you have any questions. And if there's something in the chat, if someone could volunteer to let me know that. I can kind of see there are things in the chat, but I don't really have the time to open that up and take a look at them while I'm going. So Sung Yang, anyone else want to let me know if there's something I need to respond to?
I can do that, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you, Becky. I appreciate it. So for new grantees, April 15th will not be your timeline for providing the program measures. Because what you'll do if you're a 2024 grantee, you are going to draft your measures, project and program, and give those to your project officers much ahead of April 15th. They will figure out the timeline with you, but the idea is, you put a lot of good measures into your evaluation plan, in your application. You're going to pull those. You're going to maybe add a few more, make some changes from what you know now, and put that into what we call a status chart. You can work on this with your project officer and then send it to your project officer, who's then going to give you some feedback, some ideas about how to make it even better. It's an iterative process. That first year, it usually goes back and forth quite a few times until you get it shaped. And then after that, in the future years, it's really not that challenging. You've got your measures, you're just giving the data and the information. But that first year, the sooner you start on that, the better. I think November is a great month to put together your draft measures. And then this is the review progression in terms of when different aspects of your APR are reviewed. So implementation year 2. And when I say implementation year, you may have been funded in fiscal year 2022 for the first time, but that doesn't mean you started your work right away. There are instances where states don't get things off the ground because a contractor is doing much of their work and it takes a while to get that contract out the door. So if you started your work in the first year, great. Your second year, so if you're 2022, by 2024, you've done your second year, right? But if you didn't get it started right away, then you would say whenever you actually started doing the professional development, that's when you start counting your implementation years, right? So say you were funded in 2022, you actually started working in 2023, that's implementation year 1. 2024, implementation year 2. So in implementation year 2, CIP, the Center to Project Performance, our contractor, is going to look at program measure 1 and specifically your evidence-based professional development worksheet for the first time, and we'll give feedback on that. Implementation years 3 and 4, then CIP is going to look at program measures 1, evidence-based professional development, 2, improving fidelity, and 3 is that cost measure about ongoing assistance to improve implementation and sustainability. At the end of your grant, implementation year 5 is when program measure 4, which is improving child outcomes, will be used. It will be reviewed. You're still giving your data prior to that, but Congress, who gets all the GPRA results, is not going to get that result until implementation year 5. And then if you have a no-cost extension, potentially the year after that as well. So it's called a long-term measure, which means it's for the end of your grant. You still provide the information in your APR, and CIP will look at that, but we're not going to send those data on to Congress or other offices. I know this is a little bit complex, so any questions? Okay, I'm glad it's clear. So let's look at this year's GPRA results. This shows you, this is what I received from CIP. I receive an Excel spreadsheet. They also have a report that they create that goes to our offices, again, goes to Congress eventually. Every program in the US government has to have GPRA measures, and these just happen to be ours. And they use different numbering than we do. So measure 1.1 is program measure 1, measure 2.1 is program measure 2, measure 2.2 is program measure 3. So we got evidence-based professional development. Evidence-based professional development is this first group of data. Improving implementation is the second group. And then the cost measure is the third group. So you can see that 31 grants completed a worksheet, the evidence-based professional development worksheet for the initiative that they're looking at. If you have more than one initiative, SIP is only going to look at one of your initiatives. They're going to choose. They have a way of kind of randomly assigning them. They're going to choose the initiative, and they're just going to look at that one initiative for program measure 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on where you are in your grant. So 31 of the initiatives they looked at had completed an evidence-based professional development worksheet out of 32 initiatives they looked at. So there was one project that did not have a worksheet for them to look at. 27 of those 31 met the target, and there are different targets for different years of the program. And that's information that I will be giving in May, or sorry, not May. That's information that I will be giving when the continuation package, the APR directions come out in either late January or early February. I'll give more specifics about targets and methodology. Try to get to it today if we have time, but this is more just the results today. So, 27 out of those 31 met their target, and that meant 84% did. And then for program measure 2, improving fidelity, 25 had a fidelity measure, 24 set a target. So 96% had a fidelity measure, 92% set a target for themselves about improving fidelity. 69% of those initiatives for the projects reported actual performance data, and 50% met their target. If the target was not met, was it due to inadequate data? And 7 that was true for. So we'll talk about adequate data a bit more. And then of the folks who were supposed to have an outside observer, or of the projects that were supposed to have an outside observer because it's a self-assessment, 46%. And actually, I know Jenny is on here. I don't know, or Jennifer, we'll have to look at these data a little bit more closely. And certainly your project officer is going to talk about this too, specifically for whether or not you needed an outside observer. So program measure 3 is the cost measure. And so setting a target for the percentage of your funds that you want to use after initial training. What happens after the initial training to support implementation, sustain, often coaching, mentoring, using fidelity data to help folks make improvements, those kinds of things. So 32 projects initiatives had a target, and that's 100%. 32, 100% reported actual data, which is great. 30 of them provided the correct equation. And then 28 or 88% were within 5 points of the target. We provide a little flexibility because it's dollars and it's hard to know exactly. Measure 4.1 is program measure 4, so that's improving child outcomes. 17 of those projects initiatives had an identified child outcome measure. 17 measured child level outcomes. 17 set a target. 13 reported actual performance data, so they have data about where things are moving on that. 7 of those met the target, and 4 did not have adequate data to make a decision about what was happening there. So for program measure 1, evidence-based professional development, starting in 2016, and that was the year we really started to look at data. We started these measures generally in 2012, but 2016 is when they're really in place. We had real data to collect, and you can see the target has increased over time, but also has gone back down over time. So we're always kind of judging, what is possible. We want to stretch ourselves, but not make it impossible to meet the target. And so the year, you can see the year, this is the first column, and then the target that is set for us by our budget office, who we work with on our GPRA measures, and then the actual. So last year, 88% of projects met their target, and 82% was the target set. And so it was exceeded. This year, the target was still 82%, and we had 84.4%. So we, again, exceeded our target for program measure 1 about evidence-based professional development. These are the initiative implementation years, which we just talked about a little bit earlier. So I won't keep on pounding that. I think you get the idea. So for implementation year 2, there were 6 initiatives, year 3, 10, year 4, 2, year 5, 0, year 6, 8, year 7, 6. And you can see which ones of those met the target, or how many of them in each year met the target or didn't meet the target. All right, so these numbers are a little wonky. I was trying to make them more visible, but I can tell you about them. So initiative year, it doesn't go with the count of 1. So what this says is count of 1, 2, 3, or 4. So this is it. When you think about your evidence-based professional development worksheet, the score of 1 is the lowest score, the score of 4 is the highest score. And these ratings are from our contractor, from SIP. And so what you want, of course, is the score of 4, but 3 also counts as meeting a target. And so with the count of 1, you can see for A1, which is the first selection component, we had 0 projects that received a 1 from our contractor, 0 that received a 2, 27 received a 3, and 5 received a 4 in that component. And then I'm going to pull these out a little bit more. We don't need to stick with it. But what I look across to see is, as much as possible, we want 0 to have a count of 1. You can see in the coaching component 3 that 2 had a count of 1, and then 3 had a count of 2. So that means they were scored 1. They were scored a 1 or scored a 2. And so that's an area we would look at, that coaching component 3, because folks weren't scored as highly. You can see D2 has 5 that were scored 5 initiatives. D3 has 4 initiatives. So that's what I hone in on here. The scores of 1 and 2, the scores of 3 and 4, you can see it looks really strong. And there were quite a few areas that have improved over time. And specifically, these D1, D2, D3, these are all the performance assessments, so the data decision systems, so much improved, D1 and D2. And then also D4 and D5. So those have been problematic at other times, doing great now. D3 is the only decision system component that we could look at. E1 and E2 are about those statewide systems and leadership support and technical and adaptive challenges and changing policies. And it's really royal we, you all are doing the work, doing fantastic. We've never received such good scores on the EBPD worksheet before. So congratulations, looking great. Training, generally doing really well. I would say the one that we could look at would be B4 in training. And then the selection, doing really, really well in selection as well. So lots of parts of the system that you all have it down. I should say professional development system. So with the components to watch, the B4 is the trainers. The people who train PD participants are trained, coached, and observed. I know you all know these very well, so I don't need to read it out. I just wanted to remind you which one we're talking about. What I find sometimes is when projects use, I'm going to give you an example I always use, Anita Archer. Like you use an Anita Archer and folks feel uncomfortable telling them what to do, coaching them. They're not really the people you do that with. And I think sometimes that gets in the way of some of the descriptions of how you are ensuring that they have the right training and the coaching. That's just one thing I've seen in my own projects. You all can think about your own project about what might get in the way. If you have a score of 1 or a 2 in that Excel spreadsheet with your scores that your project officer is going to share with you, there may be a note, there often is, from the contractor saying why you didn't receive a 3 or a 4 in that area. So look at the note, see what else you can change about the description, have someone who doesn't know your project well look at your description and tell you what isn't totally clear from a novice perspective. C3 is using coaching outcome data to analyze and assess participant knowledge and skills. Now, what I've found to be challenging, even beyond the SPDIG, just generally in professional learning and professional development, is the skills part, right? And I've heard that from projects as well in our network, that determining what skill someone is going to leave with as a result of a training can be challenging. I think it's critical. I don't think it's something you back off of because you think it's hard. What I've seen across the professional development literature is if it doesn't have a focus on skills, you're unlikely to see any change in child outcomes. So as hard as it is, let's work on it together. Let's figure it out together. What skill do you want people to have at the end of the day that coaches are then going to continue to support after initial training? Any questions about what I've said so far?
Jennifer, in the chat, we have a question. This is about 214, so it's a few slides previously, but how do you say what implementation year we are in?
You look at when you first started providing professional development, and the year you first started providing professional development, you have sites that you work with, that's your first year. You start from there. So, it's really, it could be the year you were first funded, but it might be that next year as well as a possibility.
Those are all of the questions so far in the chat.
Get back to you. All right. So another two components to watch. Actually, I thought D2 was pretty good. I'm going to focus on D3. Fidelity and student outcome data are used to inform the continuous improvement of the project in collaboration with stakeholders at multiple levels. I can see how this would be very complex. Off the top of my head, I don't know exactly what makes it hard to do those feedback loops. I can guess just knowing state systems, but it'd be interesting as a group to kind of figure out and stick our heads together, especially the evaluators, about what's making that hard. So we do have exemplar worksheets, just to remind you that those exist. And, we're starting to have the old grants, the 2017s are starting to exit. So really, we're just really using the new worksheet at this point. And I talked about having novice review your worksheet. You could also have another SPDIG state review your worksheet. You could trade off. So any questions about program measure 1 that folks haven't already asked? And feel free to stop me. Program measure 2 is improving implementation. So the evidence-based practices that you want the educators to use, you are providing professional development so that they'll learn the skills to use them. And then you're measuring how those skills improve over time. So 2016, you can see we started with a target set of 60%, went up for a little while, went back down to 60%. In 2024, 60% was the target, and 50% of the initiatives that were reviewed by SIP met the target they set for themselves. So this is a program measure. Program measure 1, we set the target for you. Program measure 2, 3, and 4, you set the target yourself. So the 50% of the projects did not meet the target they set for themselves. Last year we did exceed the target, but prior to that, we had not hit our target since 2017. So this is definitely a challenging one. And it's challenging in the literature, right? If you're going to look at research, this is not just us. So this is the implementation year that folks were in. Again, it's not reviewed by SIP until implementation year 3. So there were 10 initiatives in implementation year 3, 2 in year 4, 0 in year 5, 8 in year 6, 6 in year 7. And you can see how many in each implementation year met their target. It was 50-50. So some considerations, be clear about what the fidelity measure you're using. You should name it and describe how it's a fidelity measure. Why is it a fidelity measure? If it's a self-assessment, so, whatever that might look like, if someone's saying, how am I doing on my implementation? Say a teacher is doing that, then you need a coach or somebody else to do 20% of those participants. You need the coach to do a check, because you have to have that external observation, and that is a requirement for our budget office. So thinking about next year's targets, you work with your project officer if you want to change your target. So I can't tell you to do that right now, but I do want you to be thinking, is it a stretch target that is still reasonable, that you could achieve it? So a couple of things. We do see sometimes with multi-tiered systems of support, folks have a hard time saying, but we can't get down to that level of what's happening for the student. And I would say if you can't get down to that level, it's a problem, because the whole SPIDIG is about improving child level results, right? That's written into the law in IDEA. And so we got to figure that out. Your project officer can work with you. I can also support the work, because I've seen a lot of different projects doing this. It can be a very, it can be an iterative process to get to that, but you got to get to what's happening for the student. And so you have to be able to measure, here's the thing that reaches the student that's going to make the difference. Because we know the implementation teams, the multi-tiered systems of support teams meeting is really important. All the systems work is critical, and it's in service of that provider, what they do with the child. And that's what we need to measure. Questions about that? So some folks have said in the past, it's really hard to get to that level of information, especially if we want to observe folks. And so if you're going to do an observation, that's great, gold standard, right? Can you use technology to help you with that? You can, there's swivel robots some projects are using, with Buganeer maybe, but you could also sample, right? You don't have to have the universe. You could talk with your project officer about an appropriate sample. Something else that folks have done is determine what are the common essential features. So if different places are using different interventions, because you're doing multi-tiered systems of support, and one school is focused on literacy, one school is focused on math, one school is focused on social emotional learning, how would you possibly do that? What are common features across them? And Colorado, for example, they have common features, and then they have something specific about the intervention being supported at that school that they're also measuring. And any other strategies folks can think of, feel free to put it in the chat to share those with the group. We are better together, especially for challenging things like this. So this is PBIS. This is also another area. It's, you could say it's MTSS. We could get in a longer conversation about that. But with PBIS, there's a lot of school-wide, district-wide, statewide assessments, which are great and necessary. And what happens directly for the student, and how can you measure that intervention? So when we set targets, we want them to be challenging but achievable. Look at your history. If you are new, maybe you have something else like this happening in the state that's not been this PDIG supported. You can look at that. Maybe you look at the research that's being done for that intervention. Maybe you look at what other states are doing. If you were trying to find another state doing something similar, I just had a request from a state using Check and Connect, and are any other states using Check and Connect? And I said Florida was, connected them. I'm happy to connect people. Your project officer can help with that as well. But it's really nice to use data that's already existing to figure out how to set your targets until you can see a trend in your own work. So just a reminder, reliability checks only if you have a self-assessment is it required, although you're welcome to always do it. It has to be someone not involved in the day-to-day work, right? It's not someone from the implementation team, say. And just be real clear about whether or not it's a self-assessment. And if you did the reliability check, if you feel like you had that information and SIP didn't find it, point it out to your project officer. And then when I meet with SIP, I'll make sure that I share that with them. So when we have talked about fidelity in the past, we had a conversation cafe on fidelity. Some things that folks brought up were goal attainment scaling, procedural checklist for self-assessment and monitoring of fidelity, using a statewide data system like Go MTSS in Georgia. That really helps to collect the data and then gives you a data dashboard. What are the essentials as you monitor fidelity? And then how to prioritize monitoring things efficiently. And then folks talked about maybe having a toolkit about related to fidelity, about how to collect and report data. We haven't done that yet so far. I haven't received interest in people who want to work on a group to create a toolkit. But as soon as we do, that would be great. I don't think I personally have time to do it right now, but I could certainly help with the group who is willing to do it. So deeper dive. So when it comes to what to target and how to prioritize if you cannot do it all, the GPRA is like the base level, it's the floor. These GPRA measures you must have. And then, of course, we must report them to Congress eventually. When it comes to, are there any measures that could be taken off your plate? I think it's a great conversation to have with your team, including your evaluator. And certainly when we talk about voice, if you can have the folks who you're collecting data about, it's great to have their voice too. Do they understand why the data are important, how you're using them? Is it helping them do their work? Again, we have to have these GPRA measures, but with the other measures, consider that. Is it helping you to improve things? Is it helping the people who you're working with professional development wise to improve things? The other thing I've been asking people too is we talk about an initiative inventory where you look across initiatives, you find out, what training is happening, what coaching, where's the money coming from, who's leading it, is there an implementation team that, you're looking at what you can leverage, what you could maybe even join together, working more efficiently with professional development. And I think such an important piece of that is what are all the data sources that already exist in your state? There's one state I can think of that they were asking a question for their evaluation that was a good question. And it turned out that data was already collected statewide from folks. And so it's like, if you can tap and get that data so that you don't have to ask one more thing of your project or the people you work with, it's fantastic. All right. So Fidelity Toolkit, again, if folks are interested in being part of a subgroup to put it together, these are some of the thoughts about what would be really helpful for every project to have at its disposal when it came to fidelity data collection and working with different sites and to make it more efficient. So Fidelity Fridays, this is your turn. What should our next topic be? We had a great group, helped us do a lot of things, including creating the Fidelity Fridays, had Fidelity Fridays. I think we went through all the topics generally that we had brought up as a group. And so we're ready for the next thing. And I know there was a lot of good conversation from the evaluators at this big national meeting. And so what should our next topic be for Fidelity Friday? And please do put that in the chat and then I'll collect that. Questions about program measure 2, the intervention fidelity. All right, program measure 3 is about, that cost measure I was talking about, use of funds to sustain SPDIG supported practices. See, coaching there, it's often Coaching is really a requirement of this grant program. If you don't have strong coaching systems in place, let's talk, because I have a lot of great ideas, resources, people I can connect you with. So again, starting in 2016 and going to 2024, our target is 85% of initiatives, so projects initiatives, will reach their target for this. And we exceeded that with 87.5% and did much better than last year. I would say 3.5% better. And then these are the different implementation years. You can see 84% met target, 16% did not. All right, program measure 3 is pretty easy. I think most people understand it, but maybe there's always been whispers of like, maybe not everyone's clear on it or feel like they really know what data they're supposed to use dollar-wise. So any questions about it? Okay. Program measure 4 is about improving child outcomes. So even though this is a measure to be collected at or data to be collected at the end of your grant, you still provide it every year, because we're learning together about what a good measure is, reasonable targets, how people are doing, where people need help. And SIP is helping us with that. So they're collecting what you give, they're putting it into the Excel spreadsheet for us, and we use it with you, the project officers. And so please do provide the data. It looks like that was generally happening so far. And in terms of setting targets, hopefully people are learning, same conversation we were having before about setting targets. Any challenges or ideas about program measure 4 so far? Okay. So let's think about, or let's look at what might be helpful when you're putting this all together. So I'm going to go ahead and share SIG Network. John Lind is now responsible for the website and improving it and updating it. And, he's great about responding to feedback. And so if you have any for us, go ahead and feel free to share it either in the chat, or you can just email us. I'm going to go ahead and give you the link.
My husband and his kids in his class.
I think there's one person who's not muted, and I can work on that. Okay. So I just gave you the page, the link to it, so you can get to it easily. So last year it was due May 3rd. We don't have that updated information yet, but we do have the GPRA webinar recording from last year. We don't expect things to change this year, so you can go ahead and look at that. If you're a new grantee, you just need a refresher. That should still work about how you put together your APR. The slide presentation, the Dear Colleague letter, that was the continuation or APR directions from last year, and the SPDIG theory of action, in case you're interested in that. Here we have guidance for each of the program measures. So for program measure 1, so it talks about what the objective of the measure is, who reviews it, what are the requirements, what are the targets, because we give you the targets for program measure 1, and gives you directions, and then shows what it looks like. And then an example, these are examples actually of how one state provided the information. This part down here is not required, just a little help if you want a description of how to provide information, explanation of progress. So you see program measures 1 through 4, all available here. Rubric B just helps you as you're putting together your APR to ensure that you're providing all the data that we need. So all those pieces that were in the Excel spreadsheet that I showed you, so did folks provide the right, did they provide the target? Did they describe their fidelity measure, that kind of thing? Those questions are all in rubric B. So you don't have to fill it out. It's just to help you know what you're supposed to include. And then APR fillable form is just a more updated version of that. If you want to use a PDF fillable form, this is actually for project officers, but you know, you're looking at the same thing. So decided why not share it. And then down here is the EBPD, evidence-based professional development rubric. The worksheet is what you actually use and attach to your APR, and you provide that every year of your grant. There is also a webinar from SIP, Shauna Harps and Brad Keller, that talks about, they describe how to improve your program measure submission. I highly recommend it. And here are exemplars. So APR exemplars, and then also a final report, an old final report. And we should have a new final report coming this year with the new measures. And then one thing that may be helpful if you're a new project is this APR exemplar draft. So this is when Idaho was first putting together their measures. So it just gives you a sense of, if you're a first year grant, what it might look like. Any questions about the resources we have available for program measures and the APR more generally? All right. Well, that's it for me. If folks don't have any other questions, we'll go ahead and call it a day.
Thank you, Jennifer.
You're welcome. It's always good to see you.
Glad to see you up and about.
Oh, can't keep me down.
No.
No.
Bye.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thanks, Holly. Thanks, everyone. Bye, guys.